the importance of political and social um, interactions, the idea behind looking at political and cultural socialization is this is the foundation of really all the institutions and structures in government that we create. So the fundamental job or challenge is always the same. How do we go about keeping order while also embracing change? In other words, no nation can be static. So you have to adjust to things as time goes by. So the question then becomes, how do you do that? How do you do that and not have the nation crumble? Well, you need some way of moving forward that all people agree on, that everyone is sort of on board with. But it's not something you sit and you decide. It's something that really happens over time and creates the environment. In this case, when we talk about stability amongst nations, we're really talking about the commonalities, the things they've already agreed to without actually sitting down and, discussing what those things are going to be. So over time, what happens, whether you've imported that from some other country where you've come from or what have you, over time, there is an unspoken understanding about how things are supposed to work. And that really comes from the socialization process, then by families and educational institutions and the like. It's what we believe about how we're supposed to behave, act, solve problems, what that process should be like, and how it is supposed to move forward. So the key thing here is that once those things are in place, once you've got your sort of structure in place culturally, politically, it can then help transform, their own institutions and the like to accommodate whatever new issue has now come up that needs to be addressed and resolved. The one problem here is this: any really quick changes that have to be, dealt with in terms of the culture changing or the political structure changing, any quick, movement or demand on those things creates problems. The whole idea, right, is that we need stability and we need the capacity for change. So we need to have some measure of agreement amongst ourselves about how that happens. Political institutions are one way in which that happens. We've built them. We've come to adjust them. They are to resolve issues that we need resolved as we go along. Nevertheless, if it's very quick, if the demands are so quick being made by those really social forces that the society is made up of, composed of, social forces are groups that have some common thing that binds them together. If those demands are great, too great for the institutions the political institutions to adjust to or to accommodate, this causes a problem amongst those institutions. Those institutions are the things that we need in order to create, the policies necessary to deal with new issues that may come up. So, if we have too many demands on that system, we're going to tax that system, and that can become problematic in terms of that system functioning. So people often talk about the idea of revolution. Revolution is really not really an efficient way to solve any issue that we have to address that may come up. And the society has to sort of adjust to it, and the institutions have to sort of deal with it. Revolution is not a way that's efficient in the long run. If you go back and you look at real, true revolutions, not the American Revolution, it was really a war of independence more than a revolution, right? But if you look at, Cuba, if you look at the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, revolutions rip apart all those institutions. The social forces reconform. There's a great deal of violence. And by the time things get put back in place, because it's going to be a cultural change here, right? And political change, absolutely. So over time, before those things stabilize once the revolution has taken place. And most revolutions evolve into some sort of dictatorship or that sort of thing. But nevertheless, over time, those things have to normalize. In other words, institutions have to be rebuilt. Structures have to be put back in place. A real revolution just raises everything, wipes it out, and now you have to begin anew. And so the process is very long, and oftentimes, think about the Iranian Revolution, this could take 50, 60, 70 years for things to get back into a stable situation where basically you're going to have the things that people fought for, which are usually rights, sort of really reestablished. So although revolution seems like a very exciting idea to people, it's sort of romantic in some strange way. Mindset around it, it rips everything apart. So while everyone is excited by the idea of revolution, as if once the revolution's over, everything is fixed, then the hard work begins. Once you get rid of the old guard, and once you try and transform the society, there's a whole lot of work that has to be tended to. And then the question becomes, who's going to tend to that? All right. One of the major problems, and the reason, one of the things that socialization is so directly speaks to, I should say, is that fundamentally you can't legislate into the hearts and minds of people what is not already there by nature or nurture. That's the idea behind cultural socialization and political socialization, is that we are setting up a structure, guidelines for how we view the world. In America, you think about it, right? The idea is freedom. One of the most important sort of things that people focus on is freedom of speech. That is a fundamental underpinning of society, that people should be able to, speak their minds and so on, and be able to express themselves. In America, that's such an important element of who we are, that to take that away really means that the society as we know it, the nation as we know it, has been transformed. You can't have an America without freedom of speech. The question is, what type of freedom of speech? How does that get controlled? Because you can't obviously have everyone say whatever they want, whenever they want, to whomever they want. This gives rise to all kinds of problems. So the idea here is that a lot of this is really taken care of by that socialization process that we go through. Now in America, it's important because to keep in mind that one of the major problems that we have, and this is true across all nations, that structure can be manipulated. Right? Once you put a structure in place and you socialize people to it, and they've come to expect it to be a certain way, you can then manipulate that process, that structure, to benefit you at the expense of others. And there's always going to be that dynamic. Power is always about who gets what. And when you put people in positions of power, naturally the first person or what have you on that list of who should get it is themselves. So we've tried various things to make, for example, the legislative structure in our country work better. The question is, how do you actually get people to do their jobs? So that it benefits the society as a whole. How do you keep corruption from distorting those efforts or using the tools within those institutions that have been given to those people to, think of Congress, to resolve issues when they use their position of power to manipulate the public or what have you to get more power for themselves. So we've tried all kinds of things. How do you keep somebody honest and working for, everyone, let's say in Congress? So there's been a whole bunch of different, ways of approaching this. One is to have term limits, for example. That if we limit the time that people are in power, that should somehow make things better. My feeling is always that if someone is self-serving, if someone's a thief, you let them into the store. If you say they can only be in there for a minute, they just steal faster. That someone that comes in with that kind of ill intent is going to find a way to use their position of power in order to accomplish what it is they would like to accomplish, usually something for themselves. So term limits have never really worked. People like it culturally; they like it. Everyone has power for a shorter period of time. Problem again is that you need some sort of measure of expertise in there. Who would take a job knowing that in 2 years or 3 years their job was over, and they could not, regardless of how well they did that job, they could not stay in it. No one really wants that situation. Nobody really wants to be in a position where their job depends upon convincing others that they should keep their job. So the point here is that when you talk about term limits, it doesn't really necessarily bring people that are the best and the brightest, so to speak, forward. It makes the job less attractive. However, without some sort of limitation, corruption will be rife. You'll have corruption everywhere because they're unchecked. What we've come up with here is this idea of elections. It's not our idea, but the idea of elections, that somehow those are the term limits. That if you are going to be in a position of power and you want to keep it, you have to do the people's bidding. That, of course, is problematic on so many levels. One is that people really know what they need you to do. Two, that they can assess that you've really done it. And three, that the outcome from what you've done is going to actually be what they expect or want. So there's a whole information process here. How do they really know what's happening? How can they check that? It means that in a society like a democracy such as a republic, the public have to be reasonably sophisticated consumers of political information. They have to understand it. Most people spend their time living, not following public policy. There's an assumption that there's a compact, right? We've elected you, now go do the job, and that job should benefit all of us in ways that are good for the country. So we've tried, that. Taking money out of elections has been a big thing. If we get money out of elections, then everything gets better. Well, leave aside Citizens United, the case Citizens United, where basically the court said, look, money is a form of freedom of expression. So you want to put money into or get behind a candidate, whether it's a business that's doing whatever, you have a right to do that. And so money in elections becomes problematic because then you need more money to keep your job. So you seek more money a lot of the time. For example, if you're in the House of Representatives, about half that time, those 2 years you're in, you're going out trying to get more money so you can keep your job, so you can go out and talk to the folks in your district, run your campaign. Unfortunately, the amount of money to run and win in an election has gone up over time. And because the cost has gone up so greatly, it's harder and harder for people to get in and challenge incumbents and so on. And without going into lecture on American government, the point here is simple. Money is necessary in order to keep this process of elections going. At least that's how we've set it up. They always talk about taking money out of elections or limiting it somehow. And it's always difficult because the question is then, what do we replace it with? Does everybody that wants to run for office get an equal amount of time? Do they have to get a certain number of signatures before they can, participate in a debate? How do we do this? Plus, in America, the political season has just grown. It's not like a month or two prior to elections, people come out and try and get people to vote for them when the election comes. Now it's months and months and years in some cases before the election, and that takes a lot of money to keep the machinery of, a campaign going for that long. So we've tried to limit money. That doesn't seem to have really worked very well. There's other things that work against, the system working effectively. Things like, issue networks. Congress has to get people in to testify, to give them information who are experts in the area that Congress is looking at, to help inform Congress and educate them about that particular policy area or that issue. The problem is it's the same people coming in all the time. And both political parties and major players know who the people are that they can go to that will give them the information they want to justify their policy, which they ultimately think politicians think will benefit themselves. So you can cherry pick. We're going to call on this person and that person and that person, and these are the experts. And it's sort of a known network of experts, and you get the same sort of information each time you bring them in. To make that system look fair, they also like Congress to bring in regular folk. They usually thank them for their time coming in and how it's been really insightful and helpful to hear what they think. But really, it's not going to get a lot of weight. It's a lot of political theater. I hate to be so cynical about it, but that's really what it is. All right, so there are other things that we've done, right, that we have to deal with, like the revolving door. People come into government, they go out of government, back into business or wherever, and they come back into government. So it benefits them while they're in government to do things that are going to help them in terms of their own economic well-being when they leave office, when they leave government, and then they come back because they're experts in that particular area. In other words, I work for a congressperson, a senator. I have a particular area, let's say it's California and it's water rights. That's my area of expertise for this particular senator from California. Then I leave my position with that senator because now I've worked with the senator and I can reasonably pick up the phone and call staff and people I know. My value in the marketplace goes up to those companies or those organizations that are interested in water in California. Water is very important because it's an agricultural state, or a large agricultural state. So I become more valuable to those people who are in those organizations. So that's why you see, for example, so many people leaving right after a re-election in an administration, especially we talk about the presidency, because their value in the marketplace goes way up. Why is that? Their guy got re-elected. They've worked closely with all those people in that particular area, say water, and now they can pick up the phone when they're working for a not-for-profit or a company that cares about those issues and speak to those people in power making those decisions. That makes them much more valuable out in the marketplace. So you get that movement in and out of government, so you get the same minds going in and out, in and out, in and out. And so although we've got a reason for bringing people in that are knowledgeable, they also tend to serve, different masters, if you will, than maybe the rest of the public would like. All right, so the problem here is really we need the culture and we need the political structure to deal with the changes that are going to happen in society. Rapid change that happens too quickly for those institutions to manage runs counter to those institutions. It hurts those institutions. So if we don't have any change, well, then things are pretty much running on an even course. And given the way the world works, it's almost impossible to believe that you could have something remain stable forever. That you're not going to have to change anything. The one thing that's consistent is there's going to be change. And the one great challenge when there is change is keeping order in that society. The thing which helps us keep order is sort of a social compact, if you will, that's developed and propped up by this the way in which we're socialized, right? So we accept because we're socialized to accept our institutions and their responsibilities, and also the importance of social forces, groupings of people coming together around a particular issue or the like, and that those social forces require certain response from the institutions in order to resolve problems that come up. So very simple. You've got a nation, problems are going to come up. You need to solve those problems. You need to have something in place, institutions that deal with those problems, and you need to have forces coming together to let the government know there's a problem, right? Social forces. We've got wants, we've got needs. Things aren't working as they should be. We need you guys over there on the political spectrum to go ahead, or institutions rather, to go ahead and resolve these problems. That means a change, a fundamental change. All of that has to happen wrapped in the idea of culture and politics, right? And we're socialized to those things. We accept that things work a certain way. Now, when they don't work that way, when things run afoul of sort of the process. So the process is not believed to really be functioning appropriately. What do you get? You're going to get conflict. And those conflicts, once we reach the level of so physical engagement, people in the streets and that sort of thing, things get much more complicated because the way in which we've been socialized begins to break down. And as that happens, the ability of the institutions that we've set up to manage what's going on is more difficult. Add to that the fact that the political structure in America, politicians, they want to keep their jobs. So if they see a wellspring of, in terms of people wanting something or moving towards something, they want to sort of get to the front of that or be part of it because that's going to help them keep their jobs, keep them in power so they can continue to do what they're doing. No one really ever looks at whether or not they've been successful at doing it. It's odd in that way. People have their mindset around what parties stand for, political parties stand for. The Democrats stand for this, the Republicans stand for that. And they sort of bought into that. And as a consequence of that, people don't really do their homework. They sort of line up behind their party. And that means that those in that party structure, those leaders, those politicians, have a great deal of power in convincing people that this is the way things should be. But you've got to do that in a way that people are really somewhat unaware of it. In other words, you get a mass movement of some kind. Politicians want to keep their jobs. They're not really leading the public. They're looking to see where it's going and then trying to run to the front of that, crowd or whatever, mob, and say, follow me. But they're really late into the game. Had they been in earlier and seen the issues and really resolved it with effective public policy, they might not be at that point. Nevertheless, again, they want to keep their jobs. If they see, that they have to be on a certain side of an issue in order to do that, regardless of whether they, believe it or not, I know this is, again, very cynical, they're going to go there, even if it runs contrary to the way in which we've been socialized, because that's how important keeping power is. So it's important to keep these elements in mind, right? There's always going to be change, and you need stability during that change, or the nation falls. Now, we need nations because we need some sort of grouping of people. The wider the group of people, like we talk about globalization, the more people involved in an endeavor, the more difficult it is to actually manage that. Imagine if there's just one giant corporation that handled all the goods and services you need. There's one corporation for all the people in the world. I think you can see how difficult that would be, how clumsy that would be, how problematic that would be. The question is, how small do we make those units then? How do we break those units down? In terms of, nations, they break down geographically, they break down in all various manners. But the key thing is, there's a structure. You need socialization, cultural and political, in order to deal with the changes that are going to come and to keep people moving more or less in lockstep so we have a fundamental social agreement about what's acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior on the part of the people and the institutions and those that we elect to sort of resolve issues for us. We know there's going to be change. We know that we need to keep order during it, right? But allow for that change to happen. We know that when change happens too quickly, it's difficult for the institutions to catch up. It's difficult for human beings to accept such vast change in such a short period of time. So the importance here is a few things. What we're trying to get at here is, one, you're going to need to keep order in any society, but you also have to adapt. You have to change because change is going to come. Situations change, new technologies, things come about that we have to now adjust to, create policy around, and in a way that people sort of can accept. So change and order are there. Institutions and social forces are essential to that process. if the social forces make too many demands too quickly and the institutions can't handle it, you run into problems. When you allow a lot of people to come into your country all at once, as much as that is something that any nation would want in terms of people wanting to be there, and it gives the nation some value, obviously, because people want to come there, the economy and all that. That still has to be managed because it's change, right? So everything has to be managed in some way. The question is how we go about doing that. And everything in a society that directs that is built on this idea of political and cultural socialization. That tells us it's okay to do things this way. It tells us that this is the acceptable way in which we process stuff. So the key here is to remember that you're going to have change and you need order, and that the way that that all functions is by an interaction of political institutions and social forces, and that at the bottom of that, in terms of what is acceptable behavior for those institutions and social forces, that comes from our political and cultural socialization.